Christ is risen, Christos voskres. Welcome everybody to the conversation with Bishop Brian Beta. If you're watching on YouTube, you're watching on the Tranquilite Calling YouTube channel, we'd like you to like us and subscribe to our channel and also share it with your friends. We also want to let you know of another program on Tranquilite. We have a program for youth called Spark of Faith, and it comes out every 2 weeks on Sundays usually, where we have Bible readings, stories, fun games, interactions. So those programs are for kids ages usually 2 to 7, 8. But I know that older folks like it as well. And we're having a new one coming out next week. Tonight, we welcome Alex Shattenberg from the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. And Alex is going to talk to us about a bit of the history and what's currently happening with the laws in Canada regarding medical assistance in dying. So we welcome Alex, and we'll introduce him in just a moment after we let Bishop Brian open with a prayer. And Bishop, you're still muted.
I'd like to take us to the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verse 25 to 36, as we open with prayer. Now, my soul is troubled. And what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No. It is for this reason that I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name. And then a voice came from heaven. I've glorified it, and I will glorify it again. And the crowd standing there heard it and said that it was thunder, and others said an angel who had spoken to him. And Jesus said, this voice has come for your sake, not for mine. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. Then Jesus cried aloud, whoever believes in me believes not in me, but in him who sent me. And whoever sees me sees him who sent me. I have come as light into the world so that everyone who believes in me should not remain in the darkness. I do not judge anyone who hears my words and does not keep them, for I came not to judge the world, but to save the world. The one who rejects me and does not receive my word has a judge. On the last day, the word that I have spoken will serve as judge. For I have not spoken on my own, but the Father who sent me has himself given me a commandment about what to say and what to speak. I know that his commandment is eternal life, and what I speak, therefore, I speak just as the Father told me. Lord God, as you faced death, it was absolutely most unpleasant. It was horrific. And yet it is you we look to as an example in how to live our life, how to interpret suffering in our life, how to interpret pain and loneliness, and how to interpret death and understand its significance, and how to interpret life. And you, at every step of the way, defaulted to the Father's will. It's his will. You live for him. You die for us. You resurrect for us from the dead. You always lived for someone else, not yourself. Forgive each of us for the times that we have been selfish and only lived for ourselves. Help us see beyond the times that we think we only suffer alone. We may feel alone, but we are never alone. God is always dwelling within us. And so, give us the grace to open our hearts, not only to learn what we shall learn tonight about how there is a development of assisting people in dying as they choose to take their lives. But what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to intercede? How are we supposed to pray? How are we supposed to join conversations and bring light to those conversations as Christ did to our lives? Give us the grace to hear what is being said tonight as much as we can, hear it from the Holy Spirit, from our Lord. Take it to heart, let it germinate in our hearts, and give us the strength to always live for you, to suffer for you, to die for you, and allow the Father to raise us up to life. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop. And on a sad note, we've had some tragic losses in our community, our online community here. I'm going to ask Father Warren to share a few words now.
Christ is risen.
Indeed, he is risen.
We lost this past week Geraldine Coben, who for the Eparchy of Saskatoon was involved in almost everything that we offered on an eparchial level. She was very strongly represented with our youth, with our eparchy, at our camp. And she'd been, I think, almost in every episode that we could hear offer online for our conversation. So she passed suddenly. So let us remember her and Rose Medinsky, who's also on here too, also lost her grandson over the past week. So we remember them.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you. Thank you, Father. So we'll keep those people in our thoughts and prayers, and I'm going to introduce our guest. Now, actually, Larissa, Larissa's going to introduce one of our guests, and then I'll introduce our main speaker.
Christos voskres, Christ is risen. I would like to introduce Francis Maza, who is the executive lead for mission, ethics, and spirituality at Emmanuel Care, which is a Catholic health ministry of Saskatchewan. He is the guy who keeps all Catholic health institutions in Saskatchewan Catholic. So he leads staff on spiritual retreats. As Bishop Brian said, he makes sure the crosses are publicly and well displayed in the churches, in the churches, which are also hospitals. So in the hospitals in Saskatchewan. So we welcome him tonight. And he also has a very important role when staff are struggling and they need advice, they can turn to Francis. So he is well versed in tonight's topic of MAID. So thank you, Francis, for making time and joining us on the conversation.
Thank you, Larissa, for the nice welcome, and thank you, Bishop Brian, for inviting me to this. It is a pleasure to be with you, and I'm looking forward to the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And now I'll introduce our main guest speaker for this evening. His name is Alex Shattenberg, and Alex has been the executive director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition since July of 1999. So it's over 20 years now. And he became the international chairperson in 2007. The Euthanasia Prevention Coalition His goal is to build a well-informed, broadly based membership of groups and individuals in order to establish an effective social barrier to euthanasia and assisted suicide. Alex has had articles published in newspapers worldwide and has had one of the world's most widely read blogs on issues related to euthanasia and assisted suicide. That blog, you can find it at www.alexshattenbergblogspot.com. We'll put it on the chat here on Zoom and on YouTube. Alex has become known as the definitive source of information on issues related to euthanasia and assisted suicide. And he has also published a book on these issues. And the book is titled Exposing Vulnerable People to Euthanasia and Assisted Suicide. And you can find that on Amazon. So it's with great pleasure, but also some trepidation that I welcome you tonight, Alex. This is a heavy topic, and I know you're going to give us a great presentation. So thank you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you today. I've got a PowerPoint that I can follow with. And so I was asked first to give you a bit of a history of how we got to this situation. And so I will just tell you that Canada's been debating the issue of euthanasia for many years. Some of you would remember the issue of Sue Rodriguez. She was a woman in British Columbia who had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, and wanted to die by euthanasia. And she went to the Supreme Court of Canada in 1993. And at that time, the Supreme Court said no, that they would not change the law. They would not, that it was a 5-4 decision, so it was close, but they said no, that there would not be euthanasia. So in fact, Sue Rodriguez ended up dying with the help of somebody else, if you call it help. Then there was the case of there was the Latimer case where Tracy Latimer, and this was also in 1993. Coincidentally, it was soon after the Rodriguez decision that that Robert Latimer decided to take the life of his daughter Tracy. She was around 11 years old. She had significant cerebral palsy, but he decided to kill her in the cab of his truck. And he called it to be, he said it was a mercy killing. So this is where you have things in the early days. It had been debated several times in Parliament. In 2010, there had been a bill in Parliament that was presented by Francine Lalonde, who was a Bloc Québécois member of Parliament, and it went through debate and to final vote, and it was defeated by 228 to 59. So it was overwhelmingly defeated. So you have this situation where the euthanasia lobby was overwhelmingly defeated in 2010. So they decided to take the issue to the courts. And that's where things went next. It went into the Supreme Court of Canada. It started with the case in BC called the Carter case, which was based on Kay Carter. Kay Carter was a woman who had a degenerative condition. She was not terminally ill, but she had, her bones. She had a problem with, how would you say, wasn't brittle bone disease, but it was a degenerative bone type condition. She was quite elderly. She went to Switzerland and died by assisted suicide. And then her family took the case to the BC court, saying that that their mother, Kay Carter, was denied her right to assisted suicide in Canada. And that was the beginning of the case. And it went from there so it was heard in the BC court, it was approved in the BC court, then it went to the Supreme Court of Canada, who decided unanimously on the side of Kay Carter, but it went further than that, and this is where we have today. So when we were debating, it was Bill C-14, which passed in 2016. You have this sales job that was done to Canadians. We were told that this would be for only people who were terminally ill. People must be dying. So they said your natural death must be reasonably foreseeable. Now, if you looked at the Bill C-14, you would have noticed that that term, natural death being reasonably foreseeable, was never defined. So that created the first problem. They said it would have to be people who were suffering. But when you see the terminology around that, you realize it's not defined. And in fact, it was based on one's personal suffering. Okay, everything was personal. If I felt that the medical treatment that I would have to experience in order to possibly get better was unacceptable to me, therefore I would qualify. So all of these things were subjective. and this became a serious problem. Then in 2019, the decision came out in Quebec. It was called the Truchon decision. I'll get into it a little bit very shortly in my PowerPoint. The Truchon decision was brought to the Quebec court based on 2 people with disabilities who were not dying, but who felt that their medical condition was so that they should qualify for euthanasia, medical aid in dying. Euthanasia is lethal injection, just so you understand. We think of this often as assisted suicide, where the doctor would prescribe lethal drugs. That is also legal in Canada, but it rarely happens. I can get into that with you too if you ask me about it. Once again, that's almost a talk on its own. And nonetheless, euthanasia is done by a physician where they lethally inject you. And BLC 14, when it legalized euthanasia in Canada, how it did it is it created an exception in our Homicide Act to euthanasia. So if you actually want to find the definitions from Bill C-14 and now Bill C-7 in our criminal code, you can find it under homicide. That's where you find it. It's the exception to homicide in our criminal code. And that gets into a whole new debate. So let me go through this information with you. So what happened is the Truchon in the court decision, it happened during the previous election that the court in Quebec came down with this decision saying that your natural death being reasonably foreseeable was unconstitutional, that requiring someone to have a type of a terminal condition was unconstitutional. That decision was never appealed by the federal government. That in itself is a real huge precedent. The government always appeals decisions of a lower court of a significant nature, such as euthanasia, assisted suicide, or whatever it might be. If it's a significant issue, they never not appeal. They always appeal lower court decisions. So this was, Truchon was a lower court decision in Quebec, which was then not appealed. And if you have any legal background, you'd understand if you don't appeal a decision, it becomes then the precedent. It becomes the law. You know, it becomes what the law has to follow. So let's go on here. Now my slides don't want to switch on me. Here we go. Now they will. So what is the current situation? So Canada legalized euthanasia and assisted suicide June 2016. That was Bill C-14. Canada passed Bill C-7 on March the 17th. So that's very recent, and expanded the law, even though the government did not do the 5-year review that was required by the original legislation. So if you look at Bill C-14, Section 10 of Bill C-14, so Bill C-14 passed in June of 2016, Section 10 required the government to begin a 5-year review of the law, and the legislation was quite clear. It was supposed to be a fulsome review, not just a minor review of a few issues of both the euthanasia legislation, the MAID legislation, and palliative care. That review is going to begin starting this month, but it was supposed to begin in June of 2020. Instead, the government expanded the law without first reviewing the law. So we have to understand this government and what it's thinking, right? This is a very, it's setting its own precedents here, okay? Now you would say, well, we had COVID, Alex. Well, remember, the government introduced Bill C-7 in February of 2020. COVID delayed it. Nonetheless, they introduced the legislation before doing a review. You would say, yes, but Alex, is based on the Truchon court decision, which came down from Quebec. Well, wait a second here. They should have appealed it, but they didn't. But Bill C-7 went far further than Truchon, and I'll get into that. The Truchon court decision was only based on the first section of what I say Bill C-7 did. Bill C-7 removed the requirement in law that a person's natural death be reasonably foreseeable. Now remember, that term was never defined in the original legislation, okay, which created a serious problem. What does it mean that your natural death is reasonably foreseeable? I personally believe that all of our natural deaths are reasonably foreseeable. I don't know. If you don't define it, what does it actually mean? This was a problem in Canada. It was a serious problem. The Quebec court struck that down. This was the only change that Truchon required. So the government didn't even need the legislation. They could have just said, we've accepted the Truchon decision, and that's wiped out of the law, okay? They could have done that. Bill C-7 permitted a doctor or nurse practitioner to lethally inject a person who's incapable of consenting. A lot of people don't realize what this did. So if that person had been previously approved for euthanasia and assisted death, MAID, whatever you want to call it, then if they became incompetent after the approval, Bill C-7 will allow the euthanasia to go ahead. Now, why is this important? Because consent was considered a basic, primary, fundamental principle of the original law. You must consent. The original law required consent at the time of death. So if you eliminate the requirement of consent, you're opening the door to many other things which are going to be debated now, okay? This also, I believe, contravenes the Carter court decision, the Supreme Court decision. Why? Because in Carter, the Supreme Court said you must be capable of consenting. I mean, you must consent. So the government has gone even now beyond Carter, okay? Bill C-7 waived the 10-day waiting period. So in the original legislation, there was a 10-day waiting period. So what it did is it said, if your natural death is reasonably foreseeable, undefined, then you could have a same-day death. They've waived the 10-day waiting period, meaning someone could request euthanasia in the morning, and if the process was gone through with a physician and a nurse practitioner, or two physicians or two nurse practitioners, within that day, they could die the same day. It's all possible under this legislation. So why is this important? Well, studies prove that your will to live fluctuates. There are lots of people who are going through a terrible situation in their life, who are emotionally, psychologically, spiritually distraught, who want death. They have suicidal ideation, but their will to live fluctuates. The studies prove this. Dr. Harvey Chochnov, who's a Canadian psychiatrist, did significant studies on this question and proved without a doubt that human beings, their will to live fluctuates. You can have the same day death. You die on your bad day, never have a chance for your good day. Bill C-7, though, created a two-track law. Now, why is that? I already explained that the law eliminated that your natural death would have to be reasonably foreseeable. So what they said is if your natural death is reasonably foreseeable, there's no waiting period. You could have a same-day death. But if your natural death is not deemed reasonably foreseeable, then you would have a 90-day waiting period. Now, this creates a big problem, actually. I don't have a problem with waiting periods, but I recognize court decisions that we've had in Canada which believe that anytime there's an inequality in the law, the court will strike down the law. This two-track law actually creates a new inequality in the law. So what they're saying is one physician might deem that your natural death is not reasonably foreseeable and say you have a 90-day waiting period before you die. But a next physician who might have a more, how would you say, progressive, if you want to call it, I think it's regressive, but nonetheless, idea about your natural death being reasonably foreseeable might approve you for the same day death. So what then you have is you have an inequality within the law. Someone might die immediately if they go to one doctor, but have to wait 90 days if they go to another doctor, but have the same medical condition. And there's going to be a court challenge to this part of the law for sure. And what does that mean? That means that if the court hears this case, there'll be no waiting period for anybody. That's what it means, okay? Bill C-7 originally claimed to prevent euthanasia for people with mental illness. Then the Senate got involved in it, and they demanded that the law include people with mental illness. So the government now approved euthanasia for mental illness, but they said you have to wait. We have to wait 2 years while we develop, how would you say, rules or the policies around euthanasia for mental illness alone. Now, if you look at the actual law, though, once again, this is another lie. I argued from the beginning that euthanasia for mental illness was always allowed within the law. Now, why is that? Because the law says, this is what the law says, you can have euthanasia for people who are experiencing physical or psychological suffering that is intolerable to the person. That's what the law reads. You must be experiencing psychological suffering that is intolerable to the person, meaning it's subjective. It's how I feel, right? And that cannot be relieved in a way that the person considers acceptable. Now, psychological suffering was already defined at that point to include mental illness. See what I'm saying? I'm saying the law in its language already accepted euthanasia for mental illness, but previous to Bill C-7, your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable, which was the caveat which prevented euthanasia for mental illness alone. So what I'm suggesting is this 2-year clause for doctors who run euthanasia clinics. They're going to ignore that. They're going to probably wait the 90 days because the 90 days is part of the law now. But I mean, the fact of it is I can't see how this prevents euthanasia for mental illness. And I'm not trying to encourage it either. I'm just saying the honesty. Why would I lie to you? This is what it seems to say to me. And I've been at this too long to be hoodwinked. So this is some data for you. Why am I giving you Ontario data? I have the Ontario data. It's possible that Francis Mazza's got the Saskatchewan data. I've got the Ontario data. And so I'm going to tell you that in Ontario, as of December 31st, 2020, there were 6,696 reported assisted deaths in Ontario. I call them assisted deaths because that's both euthanasia and assisted suicide. So just so you know, 6,694 of those deaths were euthanasia, meaning the doctor did it, right? They lethally injected you. And 2 were assisted suicide, meaning the doctor prescribed you the lethal drugs and you took it yourself, self-administered. So it's almost always euthanasia. Now we can have a talk about why that is. I can give you very strong reasons why that is. Nonetheless, that's a whole nother talk. There was an increase in Ontario alone of 33% of assisted deaths in Ontario in 2020 alone. 33%. We had 2,378 reported assisted deaths in 2020, and we had 1,789 in 2019. Why is this important? Well, the Canadian data we don't have for 2020. We just don't have it. It's not released yet. It's not been sent to us. So we can only imagine what those numbers are, right? So if I could tell you what Ontario is, and Ontario represents 39% of Canada population-wise, right? Not land mass, population-wise, it's 39% of Canada. Then obviously it gives you a strong indication of where Canada is going. Okay, I'm not saying Saskatchewan or Manitoba have gone that way. I'm saying certainly Ontario did. Okay, so in July of 2020, Health Canada released its first annual report. Doesn't that jump out at you? We legalized this in 2016. The first annual report came out in July of 2020. Doesn't that seem funny to you? I think it's funny. I tell you another thing. If you read that report, what does it say? It essentially goes through the data, but it doesn't tell me anything. It tells me the number of people who died who had cancer first. It tells me the ages. It tells me where they came from, what provinces, etc. It doesn't actually get down to any brass tacks as to why people were dying by euthanasia. It doesn't. It really doesn't. So the data from the report indicated that in 2019, there had been 5,631 reported May deaths, which was at that time 2% of all deaths in Canada. And that had been up from 4,467 in 2018. Now I keep using this term reported because remember, who does the reporting? The doctor or the nurse practitioner who carry out the death are required by law to send in a report. If they don't send in a report, is there any way of actually tracing that a report that someone died by euthanasia, but the report had not been sent in? No, there's no way to trace it. There's no way to know. So is there unreported euthanasia deaths in Canada? I don't know. But what I do know is if you look at the Quebec data, they actually show you unreported euthanasia deaths because Quebec has its own report. So is there more deaths in Canada? Probably yes. But because of how we do our reporting in Canada, it's impossible truly to know. So I can only surmise, which doesn't help you too much. The report said there had been 13,946 medically assisted deaths reported in Canada up until December 31st, 2019. So I'm estimating that somewhere around 7,400 or 7,500 deaths occurred in 2020. I'm only basing that on the Ontario data, which was a 33% increase. So even if the number was lower than that, it can't be substantially lower than that. It's somewhere in this range. And it tells you that we as of December 31st, 2020, we had long passed that 21,000 mark. So we were successful in defeating euthanasia bills in Canada. We defeated them over and over again. And I don't need to go into this more, but I think it's important to talk about these things, about these issues based upon what happened in Canada. When Canada legalized euthanasia and assisted suicide, well, I already talked about that, so let's move on. The government has agreed to passing Bill C7 to establish a review of the law. So the review is actually beginning now. Just so you know, on the 15th of April, the federal government approved that there's going to be a review of the law and that they're going to appoint 10 members of parliament and 5 senators to take part in this review. The problem with the review is the government is sort of setting the parameters based on what was not accomplished in the expansion of euthanasia with Bill C7. They're looking at issues of advanced consent. They're looking at issues of child euthanasia and things like that. It's up to us to make sure that the government is willing to actually look at the question of what's actually happening here in the first place, right? The government has suggested that the review would examine such issues as child euthanasia, euthanasia requests by advance directive, and protocols for euthanasia for mental illness. We consider this, though, as an opportunity to actually challenge what's happening in the law. I'm not saying this government will go anywhere with it, but I think Canadians need to hear these things. We need to know these things. There has to be truly an examination about what's actually happening in Canada, and people want to avoid that issue, and they shouldn't. The quick expansion of Canada's law is concerning, but we're also concerned about the stories of pressure and concern that have happened in Canada. People have been pressured, okay? There's been coercion. There's this willingness to accept euthanasia for mental illness. This seems to be a ridiculous thing. If you go back to 2015 during the debate on euthanasia, this concept of euthanasia for mental illness alone, people would say, oh, we're not going to go there. Well, we're there. Sorry, we're there. Human rights for people with disabilities. Are we truly understanding this issue in relation to human rights for people with disability? And of course, this prospect of more expansion, more growth of euthanasia is on the table. So I'm going to tell you a few stories. In August of 2016, Candace Lewis, who was 25, was born with multiple disabilities. She was pressured by a doctor to ask for an assisted death. This happened in Newfoundland. And you notice it says August of 2016. This was soon after legalization. Candace was very sick, and she was receiving treatment. No one questioned that she was very sick at the time. In fact, her mother was told over and over again that Candace was dying. Her mother thought, well, this is very sad. Candace is dying. The doctor asked her mother if she knew that assisted death was legalized. Her mother said no. The doctor said that he supported assisted death and wanted to help her. Think about this. The doctor was told that they weren't interested in an assisted death. The doctor told her mother that she was selfish and challenged Candace by saying, do you know how sick you are? So what happened here is Sheila, Candace's mother, decided that if Candace is dying, she should go home. So Sheila took her daughter home. She cared for her at home. Candace didn't die. She continued to live. She actually got better. The year later, when her sister got married, Candace was part of the wedding party. We sent the film crew down to interview her for our Fatal Flaws video. And you can see, if you watch the Fatal Flaws video, you'll see Candace Lewis. She didn't die, but her mother was convinced she was dying because that's what she was told. Your daughter's dying. So she thought if she's going to die, then she should die at home and be cared for at home. She didn't die. I'm not saying people always get better. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying this was the reality. She was so pressured, she thought, I'm getting out of there. We're leaving. We're going home. Roger Foley. Some of you have seen this story. Roger Foley, actually from London, Ontario, where I am right now. Don't hold it against me. I'm in London, Ontario. It's okay. Anyway, Roger Foley, who lives with cerebral ataxia, he launched a lawsuit in August of 2018 when a hospital offered him MAID, euthanasia, because he was being denied by the province of Ontario assisted living. So he was in a health situation where he could only live on his own with 24-hour care. He did not want to live in a nursing home or an institution. He was living on his own, but he was asking for self-directed care. And the reason is that he ended up in the hospital because his caregiver, who he had not hired, it was sent to him, this caregiver, the one caregiver had poisoned him with, he was given, bad food. He was poisoned. He had a food, he got sick from the food he was getting. Another caregiver, who of course he had not hired, had left the stove on and then went home. And of course, he's like, I'm in a bed. I can't move. I can't get up to turn off my stove, and I don't want my apartment to burn down. So he says, I need self-directed care. I need to have control of it. And the province said no. So what happened is he was told, the hospital said, you have a choice. You can pay us $1,500 a day, because he was refusing to leave the hospital till he received self-directed care. Self-directed care is a program in Ontario. Roger Foley is not the only one who currently receives self-directed care. Okay, so this is not a brand new thing just for Roger Foley. Anyway, he was told you can pay $1,500 a day to stay in the hospital, or you can have MAID. Those are the choices he was given. Of course, he made a big deal about it. And by making a big deal about it, he actually won his self-directed care. In July 2019, Alan Nichols, who was living with chronic depression, died by euthanasia. And this was in British Columbia. Alan was not physically ill, but he was experiencing suicidal ideation and wanted to die. This was not new for Alan. Alan had gone through chronic depression through most of his life. The doctors approved him for euthanasia. When he said he wanted to die, they approved him for euthanasia. He was not physically ill. His family begged the doctors to reevaluate Alan. The doctors refused. He died by lethal injection. In August of 2020, Isabel McKenzie, a seniors advocate in British Columbia, reported that some nursing home residents had requested an assisted death based on social isolation related to the COVID pandemic. I don't know how common this was, but we hear this from a news article that Isabel McKenzie had been interviewed saying this had been going on in British Columbia. In November 2020, we hear of this long-term care resident, Nancy Russell, who was 90, and she had requested and died by euthanasia. And her reason was that she wanted to avoid another COVID-19 lockdown. She was not terminally ill. She was 90 and had other health issues. That's absolutely correct. But a lot of 90-year-olds have other health issues. There's no question about it. She was in a long-term care residence because she did need help with her care. The story referred to Russell as a social and spry person who had suffered during the first lockdown. She had other health-related issues, but she had no terminal condition, as the newspaper had reported it. She died by euthanasia. Euthanasia for mental illness. Well, thanks to the Senate demanding it and Parliament agreeing to it. Now let's get this into some perspective, okay? So Parliament debated Bill C7, and in early December of 2020, it passed the bill and sent it on to the Senate. The original bill said it didn't allow euthanasia for mental illness alone, but as I argued all along, due to the language of the bill, it didn't prevent it either. Okay. Nonetheless, the Senate demanded it to be in the bill, so the Senate amended Bill C7 and came back to Parliament with an amendment requiring euthanasia for mental illness alone. The Senate amended the bill to require euthanasia by advanced request through advanced directives. Parliament rejected the advanced requests part, but accepted euthanasia for mental illness alone. Now let's put this in perspective. So David Lametti is our Justice Minister. In speaking to the Senate in these pre-hearings, so what the government asked the Senate to do is have pre-hearings on Bill C7 because they wanted Bill C7 to get through on time. So the Senate was having pre-hearings. On November 24th, David Lametti told the Senate pre-hearing committee that he supported euthanasia for mental illness alone, and he would have added it to Bill C7, but he didn't have time to formulate that. So what he was actually doing, in my humble opinion, maybe I'm wrong, he was actually saying to them, go ahead and amend Bill C7. That's what he was saying to them, because he was willing to accept that. Anyway, euthanasia for mental illness. Let's say that it creates a question around killing someone who's treatable and who has questionable ability to consent. Psychiatrist Dr. Sunner Gain. Now he's a very interesting psychiatrist because he's the former head of the Canadian Psychiatric Association. Okay. He testified to the government that it's impossible to predict whether mental illness conditions are irremediable. Now, why is that important? Because the law requires you to have a condition which is irremediable. That's what the law says. To have euthanasia, you must have an irremediable condition. And he says it's impossible to predict whether mental illness conditions are irremediable. The Council of Canadian Academies also concluded that there's no evidence to support providing MAID euthanasia solely for mental illness. Dr. John Mayer, now he is an editor with the Journal of Ethics and Mental Health. He told CBC News, I have been specializing in treatment-resistant mental illness for 17 years. I want to scream from the political and juridical mountaintop that treatment-resistant does not mean untreatable. Now, why is this important? Because the Senate committee, when they were talking about adding euthanasia for mental illness to Bill C7, and when the Parliament then approved it, the whole issue was, well, there's people with treatment-resistant conditions, and therefore these people are suffering irremediably, right? That's what they were arguing, right? And he says treatment resistance does not mean untreatable, right? If you've done this work for a long time, he said, it becomes very clear that the main reason for wanting to die is desperate loneliness and existential hopelessness. This is not coming from Alex Shattenberg. It's coming from psychiatrist John Mayer, who's actually very esteemed in his area. John Mayer told CTV News, this is a different interview, allowing medical assistance in dying solely because of mental illness doesn't take into account that those suffering from mental illness may not be capable of making the best decisions for themselves. I think that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Last week, he said, I had a patient. Now, last week, he's referring to the time of the interview, right? Last week, I had a patient in her 30s who refused treatment and who wants MAID. This is a young woman who will get better, who literally has, she's in her 30s, has at least 50 years of life left to live, he said. And this is what he was telling CTV News. Now remember, he's saying this because the debate around euthanasia for mental illness alone was what caused this woman now to say she wanted euthanasia and she's going to now refuse treatment. So let's be more understanding of how all this works. The Netherlands and Belgium also allow euthanasia for mental illness alone. We know that. We can they admit that. That's in the data. There's no hiding that. I wish it weren't true, but it is true. But what makes it different is in the protocols in the Netherlands and Belgium, you must try all effective medical treatments. So the protocols in the Netherlands and Belgium both require you to try all effective medical treatments. The Canadian law does not require you to try effective medical treatments. It says that if you don't think that treatment, how would you say, if you don't want it, you don't have to take it, is what they're saying, right? Further to that, the Netherlands and Belgium protocols require you to minimally wait at least a year before your first request and your death by euthanasia. So if you look at the Netherlands and Belgium and their protocols, now that's not the law. There's nothing in the law that says it. It's their protocols around death for euthanasia with mental illness. They require a year. That's not in anywhere in this law. So I'm just sort of showing you how this is really beyond anywhere else in the world. The approval, so the other thing you need to know is the approval and reporting system in our Canadian system denies effective oversight of the law. And I sort of referred to that earlier when I was saying there could be more deaths, we just don't know, and there's no way to know, okay? Now in Quebec, it's a little different, but I'm not speaking, I don't know, is there anybody here from Quebec? Maybe there is, I don't know. But I could tell you it's a little different in Quebec because we have two sets of laws in Canada. We've got the Quebec law and we've got the Canadian federal law, two sets of laws. The Quebec law is a little different in its reporting system. Okay, and that's why they do show in their reports some proof without a question that there's euthanasia deaths occurring that were not reported. Okay, another issue. The law allows the same medical professional to approve your death. Now it takes two. Okay, nonetheless, the one who approves your death can also be the one who does the lethal injection. So you know you don't have the separationism going on. Is also the same medical professionals then required to report the death. This is a self-reporting system. There's no third-party intervention. There's no government agent who ensures that all the protocols have been properly followed. No, it's not. It's a self-reporting system. Self-reporting systems do what? They protect the medical professional who participates in assisted death. Now, why do I say that? Well, when I'm driving down the highway at some super speed, do I call the police to pick me up? I don't. So if I do something questionable, am I going to call the police to pick me up? I'm not going to do that. It's the same thing for here. And when we look at the expansion of euthanasia in Canada, it's happened not only by these legal decisions, it's happened also by the practice of euthanasia. And what am I saying? There's several euthanasia clinics in Canada, 2 in British Columbia alone. And those euthanasia clinics have been pushing the envelope. And so therefore that's been also a reason for the expansion of euthanasia. People don't self-report questionable deaths. It's an important point. Bill C-268. Now, why is this important? What can we do now? Well, we have another problem, which is called conscience rights. Medical professionals are feeling pressured to participate in euthanasia. Now, I don't know how things are in Saskatchewan, but I can tell you a little bit about Ontario. Ontario requires what they call an effective referral. An effective referral means referral for the purpose of the act. So Bill C-268 is going to be debated in Parliament. Its first hour debate is actually next week on April 29th. It's the first hour debate. It's a private member's bill. Kelly Block is from Saskatchewan. Bill C-268 would protect medical professionals of Canada from being coerced or intimidated to participate in acts that medical professionals object to. This is important. If an election is called, though, this similar bill will be introduced again because this is not the first time this bill David Anderson in the past Parliament also had a similar bill presented in Parliament, okay? In Ontario, the College of Physicians and Surgeons requires an effective referral. Now, why is this an important issue? Because physicians who don't believe in killing you also don't believe in participating in the act. So if I don't believe in killing you, then I also don't believe it's right to send you to the killer. Logical, isn't it? Well, according to the Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons, a physician is required to send you for the purpose of the act. So to the doctor who's willing to participate in the act, okay, or arrange the act. The provincial government has promised in Ontario, promised during the last election to protect conscience rights. It hasn't done it, okay? Just hasn't done it. New COVID-19 protocols now are creating further issues of conscience rights in Ontario, and I'm sure across Canada. Conscience rights are important medical professionals. Why is this? I know several physicians who are completely opposed to euthanasia and assisted suicide, doctors who are part of our Catholic Physicians Guild who have left Canada. They've gone. They left. I don't know if it's happened in other places in Canada. I've known a few in Ontario who took off. Now, why did they leave? They left because their medical license is completely transferable to other jurisdictions. And if you're going to pressure someone to do something they believe is absolutely wrong, at a certain point, some of them will leave. Another thing is I was speaking up in a community in Northern Ontario, and after my talk, this physician comes up to me. He was in his early 60s. He looked perfectly good. He looked healthy, wonderful. He didn't sound like he was starting to lose it or anything. And he says to me, Alex, I'm right now retiring as a physician. And I said, I wanted to tell you because of your presentation. He says, the reason I'm doing it is because of the College of Physicians and Surgeons Ontario is telling me I have to do an effective referral. He says, I'll never do that. I'll never do that. Therefore, he said, I don't need the money anymore, but I didn't plan to retire, but I'm going to retire. I'm retiring. So what does that mean? You and I lose a physician who is experienced, someone who we would want as our physician. Why do we lose them? Because they feel that it's better to retire or to leave the province than to be pressured by the college to do something they believe is wrong. Okay, that's what's going on. Conscience rights, trampling on conscience rights. Well, this is a sort of a different question. Conscience rights for institution. The Delta Hospice Society was fully defunded on February 24th, 2021. And in fact, their hospice that I show here in the picture on the PowerPoint was expropriated from them. Okay, this was the building they built with their money. And the reason is that they refused to kill their patients by euthanasia. Now, why was the Delta Hospice Society picked on? Because they were willing to speak up against the policy that says that all organizations, all secular medical organizations receiving funding from the province of British Columbia had to be involved with providing euthanasia. Now, religiously based organizations were not being told they had to provide euthanasia, but secular based ones were, and the Delta Hospice Society was a secularly based organization. So they were defunded and they had their building expropriated from them. That sounds pretty extreme to me. The government didn't even bother to say, well, we will buy it off you. No, they didn't do that. No. Okay. Most hospices want nothing to do with euthanasia, but they're being forced to participate. Okay. And of course, the government of BC challenging the Delta Hospice Society in such a way really created pressure on other hospices to toe the line, right? You're going to toe the line or we'll make an example of you also. I'm not saying that's happening in every province, but certainly that happened in BC, right? Very few people ask for an assisted death based on physical pain. That's what the data shows us. I'm not saying physical pain is never an issue. I'm saying very few people actually ask for it. The numbers, it's a minority who ask for an assisted death based on physical pain. Most people who ask for an assisted death are experiencing a difficult, life-limiting disease or condition, and they feel that their life lacks purpose, meaning, or hope. They feel that no one cares about them, or they're feeling that they're a burden on others, or they don't want to be a burden on others. Many people fear future pain, but are not experiencing current pain when they're asking for euthanasia. So they're fearing for the future. Their present situation is not what is causing them to ask. And these are all normal human feelings. And when a person's lonely, depressed, socially isolated, or feeling abandoned, their lives are then threatened by euthanasia. Why am I saying this to you? Because we have members of our church communities who you would think would never, ever ask for euthanasia. These are good, faithful people. They are human beings who are going to go through sometimes very difficult times in their life, and sometimes they become so affected by that they're wearing such heavy blinders that they can't see beyond their present situation. Some people are asking for euthanasia. What they need is love and care. That's what they need. They need social support. We live in a culture of loneliness and isolation, social abandonment. We know this. It's sad, but it's true. We've never had so much loneliness than ever before, and COVID has actually just made it so much worse. It's actually accentuated it. The factors that drive people to consider suicide or seek an assisted death, these are factors that are being normalized in our culture. Let's examine our culture. Let's recognize what's driving this. There are more people who live alone, who lack significant community, who feel hopeless or feel that there's no purpose to living than ever before. This is a reality, sad reality. We have to face the reality if we're going to do something about it. Now that euthanasia is legal, people who are seeking death by euthanasia, this is often deaths of despair. They're looking at a way out. They're trying to get a way out of their situation. But these are normal human realities that they're experiencing. And we've redefined what it means to be human. It's a serious problem in our culture because of this secular humanism. We've redefined the nature of the human person, and it's not real. What we are is we are human beings. We are human beings. We're communal. We're interconnected. We need others. We're made to be with others. Even for people who are radical secularists, they have to admit humans are made to be with others, okay? Loneliness and depression, these are universal human experiences. They're not just for secular humanists. We all experience these feelings to different degrees. And even though they're based often on one's situation or disposition, we all experience these situations. In other words, it's normal for us to feel lonely. It's normal for us to become depressed. And it's normal for us to feel alone and sometimes hopeless. Yes, but we can make a difference in people's lives. This is the challenge to us. Can I make a difference in people's lives? This is the challenge we're facing right now with the legalization of euthanasia and how far it's gone. We're challenged as a people to recognize the need to be with others. Euthanasia affects everyone. Physical or psychological illness and suffering are universal experiences, and nobody wants to suffer. This culture tells me, in fact, that suffering is worse than death. That's what you hear in this culture. This culture tells me suffering is worse than death. I understand in a religious sense that suffering has value. But outside of my faith perspective, in the culture, suffering is seen as having no value. Death is better than suffering, they would say. Suffering has become an acceptable reason to kill by euthanasia. And in some cases, it's the primary reason people want to die by euthanasia. We need to be concerned about people who've lost hope, people who are falling into despair. This is a serious issue because some of these people become, I explain it that to get on what I call the euthanasia train. They're down, they're feeling down, they're looking for a way out. Someone might mention euthanasia. They might ask to be assessed. Now they're on the train. Euthanasia threatens my life. Human experience tells us that it's normal for a person who is experiencing serious illness or personal difficulties and loneliness. Now, when I say it affects my life, I know I'm a sort of an up personality. Those who know me to say, oh, he's a sort of an up guy, you know. But nonetheless, I understand also my humanity, okay? I'm under no illusion. I'm not some computer. Like, I'm not like that. I'm not programmed to be. I'm a human being. We all fear for our future. We all question our purpose for living. We all do. We all experience existential distress. When someone says to one of the priests here, you know, Father, why am I still living? Are they saying, please kill me? No, they're going through existential distress. They are questioning. They're going through human realities. This is normal for them. It's normal at times to lose hope. Sadly, we're human beings. We suffering alone, loneliness, isolation, depression, loss of hope. These are leading reasons why people ask for death. It's sold to us as we're going to end all suffering. That's how the other side looks at it. We're championing the cause of ending suffering. What they're doing is they are rejecting people in need, is what they're doing. People ask for death for all of these feelings, and these are normal human feelings. The culture of abandonment leads to assisted death, and we can change it by caring for others. Now, I'm not saying we will always be successful when you care for others. Like, I get phone calls all the time. People say, oh, what is the euthanasia prevention call? What does that Shattenberg guy do? Like, what does he do? And they don't realize, like, he's on the phone regularly with people. I get calls all the time from people. I got a call from a woman not so long ago, and her husband had been approved for euthanasia. And she's a woman like you and I, a person of great faith. And her husband went to church with her. So she's like, he's asked for euthanasia. He's been approved for euthanasia. What can I do about this? I don't have all the answers. I can talk to her. I can help her. I can help her talk to him. I can help other family members to talk to him. But sadly, the law only gives him and the doctor the power. So we deal with these issues. We work on these issues together, and we talk about these situations. We've had some great successes. Sadly, I had a call about a month ago from one of my brothers in the Knights of Columbus, who's very concerned that their former Grand Knight who asked for euthanasia, was approved for euthanasia. And we talked about it, and then there was a lot of communication that went back and forth, and somebody else said, oh, I'm going to talk to him. He's been a friend of mine. And we had these conversations, and the reason is that they're seeking advice as to how to convince someone who's now convinced that euthanasia is their answer. How do you talk to them? Well, sadly, that case was not successful. I'm very sad to say that, but we have had many successes. Many people have changed their mind and died a natural death. The answer is to care and to be with others, to journey with others at a difficult time of their life. I cannot change the world, but I can change the world around me. And we have to understand that. More than ever before, we have to recognize the importance of significant community. We need to be part of significant community. We can make a difference in the lives of others, and we can help protect them from euthanasia. So there's also a group that we work with. We actually helped to found it. It's called Compassionate Community Care. It's a charity in Canada, and it's created to help people who experience difficult health conditions, but also it's created a training program. Now, during COVID, this is not that helpful, but still the issue of phoning people, talking to people, being in communication with people is still the same, but visiting people has changed during COVID. But nonetheless, it's a training program to help people with the skills to visit and to be with others, because social isolation and loneliness is our enemy. Okay, that is our enemy. We are human beings. The CCC volunteer program provides the tools to call and to visit with people and others. And we have to recognize in our communities, we have a lot of older people. You want to be relevant to your community. You care for those who are very elderly. Why? Well, you're caring for them because that's our call to be with them and to share with them and to provide hope for them and to be a source of hope for them. But also it's a way of evangelizing, because we're truly then living our faith, are we not? We are all affected by the legalization of euthanasia because we are human. Those who say, oh, well, you know, I'm a person of faith, it doesn't affect me. It won't affect my church, it's okay. Sorry, not true. Wish it were, that'd be a lot easier. Cultural loneliness affects our health, it affects our quality of life, and it's a threat to my life. Okay, groups and individuals can organize compassionate community care training sessions. We need to create this renewed effort in our communities to care for our own and for others. We have another training session coming up on April 29th. It's actually at 9 p.m. It's 6 p.m. Pacific time. What's happening is we're doing a training session for another church community, and what's happening is that because you have 100 spaces in your Zoom account, we're asking others just to join us, because obviously speaking, it's better to present to 100 people than present to 30 people. So that's what we're doing, the next training session. So people who want to contact info@beingwith.org can do so and joining that training session, or they can contact me. Currently, the law also requires that a person who requests euthanasia must be competent. To request it, you must be competent, okay? Now that might change, right? Because that's what they're debating now, putting it in your advance directive. But the government is also discussing expanded law to include requests for power of attorney for personal care documents you put in your advance directive. This means that a person would be able to state in a power of attorney for personal care that if I become incompetent, then I approve my life being ended. Now think about what that means for the concept of incompetent people being killed. And why do I say that? Well, if competence right now is seen as, how would you say, a stepping stone to justice, and justice is killing, then what about the person who never requested it, but is now incompetent and has severe dementia? Wouldn't it seem also just to give them the option of being killed? I'm not saying this because I'm saying some crazy ideas. I'm just saying it's logical. If competence and approval is not required in the law, then isn't it terrible when you see your mother suffering there like that? Why aren't we killing her? This is the next thing that will come after that. You need the life-protecting power of attorney for personal care document that we've produced. There's other documents by Catholic healthcare associations, etc. These documents are designed to protect your life, okay? If you designate someone as your power of attorney for personal care to make medical and care decisions for you, it only comes into effect when you're incompetent, right? So you need to appoint someone who will protect your life, and you need a document that is worded in such a way that will protect your life, right? We have no problem with dying a natural death. We've got every problem with being killed, right? you need a document that cannot be interpreted in a manner that may cause your death. Okay, and you need to appoint someone who shares your values. This is important also. I can do a whole talk on power of attorneys and the importance of that and the whole thing, but I'm not going to do that tonight. You can become a member of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. You can email me at info@epcc.ca. You can go to my blog, which is also epcblog.org. It actually is the world's largest source, most complete source of information on euthanasia and assisted suicide. It's been maintained since 2007. Not all my articles are perfect, but I mean, it's very good, and all the information on the blog always links to the original articles, if the original article still exists, that is, on the web. And it is the best source of information on euthanasia and assisted suicide, and is used worldwide. I'm going to stop the share. I'll leave it there 1 second so you can see the information. If you want to find Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, it's easy to find. You can Google it. Comes up nice and easy. It's well hit, and I'm happy to provide answers. I think we're supposed to do some question and answers now. Yes. Okay. So I'm happy to take any questions from anybody, and you can tell me how you want that done. And it's now 8:03. So I went on for at least 40 minutes. So I've certainly used up all my time. Yes.
Thank you so much, Alex, for that grim but real reality of ours. And I think you gave us all a really comprehensive history of everything happening here in Canada and data from around the world. We do have some questions in the chat. So I'll read them out. The first, you kind of touched on it. It's from Valerie. She said, by any chance that has the pandemic impacted numbers? People just giving up because of restrictions, and we heard of that.
So the answer is yes. To what degree, it's hard to tell, but certainly the answer is yes to some degree. Absolutely, yeah. There are some people who have chosen, have asked for euthanasia and died by euthanasia because of the pandemic. Yes, yeah.
Sad time we live in. Next, from Michael, who does benefit from pushing euthanasia on people?
Well, I don't know who actually benefits. I know that it's a philosophical perspective for some. It's the issue of euthanasia is difficult because many people look at it from the theory, right? They're convinced by this theory, and so therefore they're promoting euthanasia. The theory is of the good death, and all these people are suffering so greatly. Well, the reality is we can properly care for people. That is possible. You don't have to kill people to properly care for people. But, obviously euthanasia is a quicker way. You lethally inject someone, you kill them, and they die much quicker that way. But what happens is in the culture is that we have a lot of sort of a mixed up way of looking at things as human beings. What makes us human is that we err, we make mistakes. We are not perfect beings. There's nothing perfect about us. And we're influenced by our media settings and everything else. So how euthanasia is sold to us in the culture by the media, etc., by movies and TV shows and everything, actually is what feeds that euthanasia mentality. Because you hear these terrible stories on the media, people wanting to die, and they're going through the most horrific physical pain and situations, and you're thinking, that's horrific. That Alex Shattenberg and Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, they're the most horrific people in the world because they would deny that person a freedom from that horrific suffering. So what they're doing is by creating these difficult, horrific stories in the media, what they're doing is they're feeding the flame. So a lot of people will say, well, I could see there might be a problem with this concept of euthanasia. I could see there might be a problem with it, but I would hate to suffer like that. So in fact, they become sort of soft to the idea. You know what I'm getting at? The euthanasia lobby did that with several stories, especially in 2015, before legalizing euthanasia in 2016. We faced quite a few stories to the media about people who were suffering horrifically, and that the answer was euthanasia. And a lot of these stories were really, how would you say, created and built in order to shift the culture. And sadly, they did so, yeah. Yeah. For those suffering with mental illness is the next question. Do they themselves provide consent? Well, I don't know actually how the rules are going to be set because we don't really have rules yet around euthanasia for mental illness alone, right? What I do know is that consent was originally considered in the beginning to be a paramount part of the law, right? You must be capable of consenting. In fact, Bill C-14 said that you must be capable of consenting at the time of death, which of course was seen as a hindrance to the law because some people lost the ability to consent at the time of death and therefore, quote, quote, were denied their right. Now, what's ridiculous about this is once you take out these fundamental parameters such as consent, well, what does it now mean? Like, who now can die by euthanasia if consent is not required? Well, it goes back to my original point, and that is, if the issue then is all about, ending suffering per se, well, there's lots of human reasons why we suffer, right? There's lots of human suffering, different reasons why we suffer: mental illness, physical illness, different things, psychologically, existential suffering is a serious issue, absolutely serious issue. So, well, what is the next reason for euthanasia? Because the problem is there is only one line, and we crossed that one a few years ago. And that line is the line in the sand says, "Thou shalt not kill." That's the one line. There aren't 2 or 3 lines. There's one line. Once you cross the one line, all we're now debating is the reasons why we kill. And I say kill because that's what it is. You can call it what you want. It is killing. That's what it is. So I thought euthanasia is only justified for terminally ill who are in great pain and suffer. Well, Michael, that's what the media told us, but it's not true. It was never actually about terminal illness because they said that your natural death must be reasonably foreseeable in the law, and they never defined it. By not defining it, they created an open-ended question, and it was a real problem. Really, I could tell you quite a few stories about how the euthanasia law was widening between 2016 and today based on the practice of euthanasia, because doctors were doing things. Well, if that was acceptable, well, then this would be acceptable, then this would be acceptable, because you don't define it. If it's not defined, what does it mean? And it became a serious problem. The other thing about being in great pain and suffering, well, it was based on subjective pain, because how the law was written is, if you consider your pain too great, or if you were treatable, the question is, did you consider that treatment acceptable? That's how the law was written. It was subjective. So it was really never about people who are in great pain and suffering. It was about, though, allowing physicians the right in law to kill you. That's what it was about. Yes, absolutely. And if you read the law, if you read how the law is actually written, the power is in the hands of the physician and the nurse practitioners who are deciding. And the law, if you read it further, gives total protection to them. Okay, total protection to them. The law is quite clear that it's impossible to charge somebody with homicide or something, because all they have to do is follow the good faith principle. And I can't prove that it wasn't done in good faith. It's not possible. I can't prove that. No judge will say that, and no jury will say it wasn't good faith. So it's impossible. So that's how the law was written. And what do you do for a person with mental disease who refuses treatment? Well, as I say, in Belgium and the Netherlands, I'm not saying that all the physicians follow the law, but the protocols require that you must try all effective treatments. So in Belgium and the Netherlands, if you're not physically ill and dying, and you've been approved for euthanasia, you must try all effective treatments before they can go ahead and doing it. That's in the protocols, as I say. In Canada, that's not required. So there you go. What age does the current law allow? Well, you have to be 18 right now, but that's under debate. Now, why is that under debate? Well, that's unconstitutional. I don't believe in euthanasia at all. So don't get me wrong. I'm not giving the other side reasons to kill people, but I recognize if a 17-year-old had cancer, you couldn't deny them euthanasia because they weren't 18. If a 16-year-old had cancer and were suffering, you couldn't deny them euthanasia because they weren't 18. It's unconstitutional to do that. You can't. And we know that there's been other healthcare decisions that have gone through the courts, which have made it very clear. You can't deny somebody to something based on age alone unless there is a significant cultural reason for it. And there isn't in this case. The other thing is we already have the issue of mature minors. Certainly in all of Canada, a mature minor is treated as if they are an adult. So therefore, you can't deny a mature minor the right to make a medical decision if they're considered mature minors, right? Therefore, in the same way, how can you deny it to someone who's 17, 16? You can't. You can't. So that's just a matter of a court case happening. There hasn't been a court case yet, so they haven't struck that down yet. Am I being negative? No, I'm just being honest with you. I'm not going to give you any sunshine when the sunshine doesn't exist. I'm not going to tell you, oh, that could be upheld. Yes, that's a solid part of the law. It's not solid. It's simply not. I wish it were. Are you a social worker or a lawyer? I'm not a social worker, and I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a physician. And I'm someone who's been doing this for a very, very long time. And it would be awfully nice if I were a lawyer, because then I could make a ton of money on these cases, but I'm not. Nonetheless, this is what I do. And I think I do it very, very well, because the reason I understand the law so well, it's not because I've studied law, it's because I've been involved with it so long. You can't, all of these circumstances I've been involved with from the very beginning. I've been involved with court cases. We've had lawyers go to the Supreme Court of Canada representing us. I've been involved with all of these issues from the beginning right on through, all the developing of our court responses and everything, all of it. So, if there's anyone who understands this side of the law, I do. I'm just being honest with you. I've done it so much. How can I not? That's just how it is. There must be some other questions. If not,
I have a question, and I guess
Yeah.
I don't know if you can answer this, or maybe Bishop or Father Warren. If somebody of faith does ask for medically assisted suicide, are they still, I don't want to use the word allowed, are they still welcome to have a proper burial from church and allowed to be buried in a Catholic cemetery?
I can actually answer that, but I don't know if I should. I know the bishop probably has something to say, but I can say the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith answered that question in a document last year. That was a brilliant document, and I would urge people who are interested in that question to read the document. It was definitely worth reading. Well written, incredibly reasonable. I'm not sure if the bishop
Go for it.
wants to comment on. So what the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith made very clear is that knowingly, if someone is knowingly doing this, and see, here's the problem. Often a priest will have no idea. So obviously speaking, then it's not even an issue at hand. I've gotten calls from priests who said, Alex, this terrible thing has happened. Parishioners knew so-and-so died by euthanasia. I had no idea. Nobody told me. After the funeral and the burial, I'm told, Father, didn't you know? Didn't you know that this guy died by euthanasia? I had no idea. No one said a thing to me. So that's one issue, obviously, no idea. But in the case of knowing and someone's intentionally done this, then of course, then you have a serious problem, because first of all, the issue becomes of last rites. The issue of last, how can you give last rites to someone who's intentionally going to do a mortal sin and is knowingly going to do so because they're asking for someone to kill them? This is not about accidental death. This is about an intentional death. So it's even different than suicide, because we know in suicide, somebody might not be of the right mind. They might be going through such a horrific situation that we don't know the state of their decision making at times, right? We certainly don't know. And so, you err on the side of, we have faith for these people and hope. But in the case of euthanasia, when they intentionally requested it, they signed all the paperwork, it makes it a very difficult situation. And in fact, the last sacraments are not a possibility in that situation. And certainly neither is the funeral. I'm sorry to say, I wish it could be easier than that. That doesn't mean, here's the problem. You want to reach out to the family, right? You want healing. And there's no one who doesn't want healing. There's no one that doesn't want forgiveness to be coming. But the problem with euthanasia is it's a last act. If they're consenting to it, that is, they're consenting to someone to kill them, homicide, murder, and they're consenting to it. Now, what's even worse about this is not only are they consenting to have their life ended, they're consenting to have somebody do it to them. So we should be really praying for the souls of those physicians and nurse practitioners who are involved in the act too, because that's a fundamental issue. It's a killing. And you can't define it any other way. You can understand the circumstances in some ways, but you can't define it any other way. That's what it is. Bishop might want to correct me, and that's fine. It's okay.
No, what I think people are going to do is take a case that you've just commented on, and I would ask Francis maybe if you want to come in on this one as well. And what they're going to do is compare it. Like again, I think in the opening prayer I tried to say, how did Jesus suffer and how did Jesus die? And if we look at the elements there, Jesus gave himself up. He allowed it he did it out of obedience in the Father's will to suffer and die for our sins. And some might take that as saying, well, Jesus consented to someone killing him. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is the insidious kind of thing that we're dealing with. And so it's about preserving your life and living for God and living for others. That's what it's about, not what seems to be, to some at least, they would argue, merely, uh, saying, I allow you to kill me. That's different than saying, I want you to kill me. It's so perhaps some might just see that as hair splitting, but the intention, the motive, that's a very, very important aspect of what we're discussing here. And so when it comes to the funeral, we can't see this as, merely a congratulations for living a great life. That's not exactly what a funeral is. We are called to pray for one another, and we are not to judge. It shows that this person willfully, intentionally wanted to kill themselves, wanted to take their life, and whether that's the case or some other thing, the funeral is not to say congratulations to this person, whoever died and however they died, congratulations. It is to say, to pray for our sinfulness, to pray for our weaknesses, to pray for this person, to intercede for them. It's never to be seen as a congratulations. The rest of the family who would like to be at this person's funeral, maybe they all tried to convince this person, don't do this, please, do not do this. Don't do this. And that's my son, or that's my mother, or that's whoever it is. And I want to pray for them. If there's any time that family members would like to pray for the person, is when they clearly, according to our Catholic teaching, chose to end their life in a sinful manner. And at least the way these people perceive it, it's like, who's the funeral for? When we ask that question, who is this funeral for? It's about this person's life, but it is to allow people to focus their grief, to focus their sadness, to focus, their prayer and intercession for the life of this soul. And it's never so much a stamp of approval or a disapproval about what a person did or how they lived, as I see what a funeral is. And so I think if that comes across clearly, that's an important aspect about considering a funeral for a person who has chosen willfully to end their life, either by pulling the trigger themselves, or slitting their wrist, or the many ways that people choose to die, be it through maid or other ways. Because how is the soldier who goes into goes into the military and lives for others and defends a way of life, defends good wholesome values in a context of war? I mean, when you ask a person to differentiate between the soldier who went into that room, who knew that bomb could go off, or knew that thing could, a lot of it, boils down to what was the motive? What was the motive of the person?
The intention of the act.
That differentiates all of what seems to be the externals that seem absolutely identical, and that is a very, very crucial thing to isolate and to be clear about.
The issue of what if the person requests the last confession, Bishop might want to handle that, but the fact of it is absolution is difficult when someone's agreeing to do a mortal sin. It's very difficult.
Where is this?
Under the questions Andrew and Anne asked, what if the person requests the last confession? It's a difficult question when someone is...
We can only confess and give absolution to sins that they have committed. We can't absolve a sin that you're contemplating.
Right. And they are considering a mortal sin. It is like...
Yeah.
The problem here is that they're clearly intending it. And the problem, of course, that's why I differentiated it from a suicide where you have to really question whether the person is in the right mind. According to the law in this case, they are in the right mind. They've been approved to be in the right mind. They've agreed to it. They've signed off on it, and they've asked to be killed.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. Also, the funeral's not okay. That's all. I'm always distressed when I read an obituary.
Did Francis maybe have a comment?
Well, the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, the document, I thought it was the best document I've ever written on it. I've seen it on this thing. I mean, because it was so, it went through all the different issues around last rites, around, issues around the funeral, all these issues went through, because it deals with the question of knowingly, then the person who's knowingly doing something, which is a murder. They're knowingly involved with that. It's a very difficult question then, because in no way do we deny mercy to anyone. In no way do we want to, but how do you deal with someone who's intending something? It becomes very difficult.
Yeah. Francis?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Bishop Brian. I mean, if you put it into the context of this last Sunday gospel, where the disciples are hiding in the room because of fear, and there's a couple things that we should pay attention. Fear is a powerful thing that attacks people and makes them do things that they often wouldn't do if they would be under normal circumstances. Fear and the darkness of being in that place can make your mind make decisions that may not always be what you have believed all your life. So with that in mind, I think people who may go through this, I don't know, even though they make that decision, as you put it, Alex, I don't know what else is going on in the minds and in the hearts. I think that the decision is never an autonomous decision. It always has a ripple effects into the family, the friends, everybody who has to read later on in the newspapers, this person went like that. It makes me wonder what happened, how did it get there, what's going on. I would suggest to you that perhaps from the pastoral point of view, when we looked into it, is to seek to understand what was going on. And if the person is already have gone through it, now we have a whole new issue in our hands, which is the family. How do we minister to them? The funeral is an act of mercy, and I can't remember who put it there, but absolutely right. So it's the corporal works of mercy. It's not a sacrament. It's something that we do because it's part of how we honor the person. And within that context allows us to provide a ministry to the family that otherwise we don't have an access to them. They don't come to us. But when they're in that moment, when they're most in their needs, the church is there to support them. And so that's a theological, and we have both bishop and a couple priests here that could give more of that. From my point of view, in terms of, I really appreciate what you have done here in terms of giving us a robust understanding of the history of how we got to this point. The reality is that we are here. There is a law that says it's legal. So within that context, I think what we need to figure out is how we respond and provide a way for people to understand what is it that we can do. See, if we wait to have these discussions until you're in the hospital, until mom or dad is asking for this, it's almost too late. you have to have these conversations early enough to talk about what is it that we want to do as we die, as we age. Is our health can change in a blink of an eye. So have you thought about what's going on? I think talking about advanced healthcare directives is important. Now, every province will have a specific guidance and rules affiliated with that. So I don't know which province you're located, but would be important to figure out what that is and to follow those guidelines, because that allows you to start talking about what does it mean to, if when that time comes in my life, what is important to me. So the family gets a sense of what's going on. You get a chance to talk to the people and give an opportunity to enter into conversation. And the other thing that I would highlight is the actual, we need to really advocate for palliative care. Everything that we have done, I mean, we're in the, I hate to say it, but the train already left. We have the law that says it's legal. Well, we also need to implement something that says, well, because it's legal, I also want full access to palliative care. But I can tell you, for an example, in Saskatchewan, we don't have that many palliative care physicians available to support all the people. Pain management control experts, we don't have them either. So how we manage and how do we introduce that as a key point of view is really, really important. So I'm just wondering, Alex, if you can maybe comment a little bit in terms of what kind of materials you have for the person sitting on the pew, who may provide, tools to communicate and have a conversation with their family members. Because if that's when you want to have it, before the crisis, not in the middle of the crisis, it's just too much. It's just too many things going on. And so, but if you can have the discussions before that, just about what does it mean to, when you get to that point.
Okay, I'm going to say two things. The first is I actually have a typo in my comment I put in the chat. I said that is no, it's not my decision. It's the bishop's decision about things like funerals and that. But nonetheless, it's not my decision. Okay, so we recognize, and I was talking a lot about the fact of the human experience, our interconnectedness. And one of the things that we've lost in our modern culture, which was something that was more normal to the community, maybe a previous generation or maybe even 2 generations ago, was this interconnectedness, this community of caring that was normal. So, and I do have experience with this because I grew up in it doesn't matter. I grew up in the old part of Woodstock, Ontario. We lived in the old part of town. All of our neighbors that I grew up with were with us that whole time, from my being a little child right on through. Nobody moved in and out of that neighborhood. We just had them always around us. There was a real intercommunity. And so in 1986, my father died. So I was 17. My father died. He died of a massive coronary. He wasn't an old man in any way. It was a sad situation. And we experienced what you called a caring community. Someone decided, one of the ladies in the community, she decided that she was just going to move into our house. So she lived there for a few weeks with my mom. Why? Because she said, well, Mary's going to be very lonely for the next little while and someone needs to be here at all times. So she just moved right on in. Now we knew who she was, so it wasn't so scary, but you know what I'm saying? That was a normal, what I thought, reality for the human person. But in fact, it was actually exceptional that we had grown up in such a community that was actually fairly close knit. People knew each other. We lived right next door to the Catholic Church. Most of the families around us happened to be Catholic, not because of any other reason than they had chosen to live near the Catholic Church. So this was a different experience. So as much as palliative care is fundamentally important, and you mentioned that we don't have enough physicians or nurses who are well trained in pain and symptom management, what is most important for the church to recognize is the nature of being with, that when someone's losing hope, how we become the source of hope for others. We too often forget that as a community, there's a lot of people in our community who we don't see at church anymore, not because maybe they don't want to be there, but because they're 86 years old and they really can't get to church anymore. And do we still know who they all are? In some cases we do, in some cases we may not. Maybe someone has physical disabilities and has had those disabilities for a long period of time. How are we interconnected? How are we recognizing the needs of our own? So if we care for our own first, that becomes at least a center block to start with. These are our own. We're going to care for our own. That doesn't mean you limit yourself to that. Let me give you an example. So if you're visiting someone from your community and they're in a nursing home, I know it's COVID right now, so we have a very difficult problem visiting anybody. But in the near future, hopefully we can visit people again. And if we can't visit them, we should at least be phoning them up. Most people still have a telephone, whether it's a cell phone or a landline, it doesn't matter. They have a phone. But we should be communicating with people. But when you're visiting someone in a nursing home or in a hospital, it's a good idea to talk to the next person. I'm not talking about bugging them or anything, but it's a good idea to communicate with them. And if you become a regular visitor, then you're a regular visitor of your own person in your community, but you're also a regular visitor to that other person who happens to be the person living next to or near that person in your community. We become signs of hope for others. We need to be this way. We have to recognize what it means to be human. And some of this has been lost in our modern world. Some of this has been lost because also family has changed. There was a time when it wasn't uncommon for most families to have, you'd have several children, and most of them, maybe not all of them, but most of them lived in that community, or at least near that community, most of their life. That was a normal human experience not so long ago. But now it's not like that way at all. You might have someone in your community who had 4 children, and none of them live nearby mom anymore. And so mom might have been a great part of your community, but now mom has gotten so old that she has now mobility issues. And is she still seen as part of that community? It's an important thing that we recognize that as a faith community, how we interconnect with those among us, and then we reach out to others outside of that within that same sense. Now, will we always be successful? And the answer is no. There's no silver bullet to all of this, but we are then at least sharing our faith, our life. Why do we do this? Do we do this for ourselves? Someone says, oh, I feel good about it. Well, that's fine. That's okay. I don't have any problem with that. No, we're doing this because we're being the face of Christ to others, right? We're sharing ourselves with others. And it's an important thing to be doing. And I noticed there was a hand up from Francis, so he can go on and speak also. Yeah.
I just don't want to lose something that I meant to say before, and that is that I catch a few things on the chat here about COVID related and isolation and loneliness. Absolutely, that's my work. I'm in the facilities. I know what's going on, and the level of our seniors being in the room and not having visitors. Just pick any province, pick any city, and you would see that as a big issue. One of the things that we're not able to go right now, but here's a suggestion I'll throw to you, because it was such a powerful thing that I witnessed. There was one church who decided that they would make these ribbons with paper hands at the end. So it was a ribbon that you can put like this, and it would be kind of like a hug. And they all had the ribbon was not this, Dolorama kind of ribbon. It was a very, very nice ribbon and the hands had a prayer. And so, and with the name of the individual, with the, from the community saying, we know, we know that you are there. We wish we can be with you. And because we cannot, here's what we're sending you. And it was the prayer hands, but they can put it around them. And you may say, well, that's kind of, the power of the people receiving this, what he did for the residents who received this was amazing. I mean, I wish I would have the camera and take pictures and video, because it was just a simple act of kindness that went above and beyond just saying, we should go visit, we should talk. This is something tangible that a church decided we were going to do this. They just say, how many people do you have? We're going to select it. And they were such a well-designed little hands with prayer. It was an awesome idea. I want to tie that to the piece that I think is important for us. Now that euthanasia is here, medical assistance, all those things that Alex have been saying, there's 3 components I think as a Catholic community we need to be very conscious about it. And the first one is that no matter what happened, we never abandon anyone, even when they make decisions that we believe is wrong. And I don't know how else to say it. People have the right to make bad choices. And even when they do that, our duty as a faith community and I'm speaking more as a theologian, is never to abandon people in the time of need. If God or Jesus would have done that, there would be nobody, right? But he went out looking for the one that was lost. So I just want to say, number one, we never abandon people. Number two, and this is another theological foundation for us as Christians, we journey with people, not because they have it all together, but because together maybe we can come to a place where loneliness and isolation can be, erased. We don't abandon people, we journey with people. And the last point is, I think, no matter what happened, we continue to show our compassion and respect. And I think there's so much more that can be gained by knowing that there's somebody who absolutely will journey with you, enter into a relationship with you, if you show that you have an unconditional love for them. Now, those are nothing new that I came up with. That's our teachings as a Catholic tradition. That's what we believe in. And in light of that law that is so, I mean, as you put it, Alex, and it's here, and it's probably going to keep going and down the tubes in terms of how the erosion of the initial challenge that came to be. I think for us as a Catholic community, and I'm just saying this, part of how our hospitals, Catholic hospitals, have chosen to respond to this is by doing those three things. We don't abandon, we journey with people until such a time that they tell us, go away. Even if they tell us that, then I guess we have to. But we journey, we don't abandon. And number three, we respect and we show compassion. It may sound simplistic, but trust me, that has been the way that we have chose to respond to people. And because of that, many have chose not to go through many.
I think that's an excellent contribution. Thank you, Francis. One thing I want to throw into the mix is the relationship that Mary, the Mother of God, had with Jesus. She was there for him. Who was present at the murder of Jesus Christ? Who was present there? And we all have to ask, why were they there and what were they doing there? And if you go around that whole scene, choosing centurion, choosing whoever it was, Mary was there, the Mother of God. What was she doing there? What was she praying for? Why was she present? How was she present? This, I think, is a very, very fruitful reflection for everyone to do if you wonder what is your role in a person who's suffering so much that they want to die. Okay? Mary wasn't there going, rah, rah, kill my son.
No.
Mary wasn't cheering for, oh, Jesus did it on his own terms. You know, you need to be clear about what life is and how to live, because how we live says a great deal about how we die, because you're still living, and you need to take that to a spiritual director. You need to take that to others. You take that to a spiritual community, I think is what Alex was saying. You don't do this and isolated and come up with your own rationale and say, that's my rationale and I'm sticking to it and I don't need anybody else to tell me anything else. I mean, the writing's on the wall there, if you will. And so if there's a funeral, are we having the funeral for the parents who are mourning the passing of a child who wanted to kill himself? You can't simply slice it off and say, well, I'm here just for these people, but I'm not here for that person who intended this. You know? You have to say why you were there. This is who I am. This is what I believe, and that's why I was there. And a lot of people can superimpose another motive, which could be different from what your motive is. A lot of people can superimpose and come to the wrong judgment about who you are and what you live for and why you are where you are and what your presence means. I asked people to go through that exercise. When when you think of the most worst sin that you have ever committed in your life, ever, was Jesus there beside you when you did it? Like Francis says, didn't abandon him. Jesus didn't abandon you. He was there. Presence is an unspeakably powerful thing. And it so easily can be misdirected or misinterpreted. And what we need to do, as was said, sit down before the moment of, and it's so intense and it's pressured. Like, sit down before and get those things out clearly. This is who I am. This is what I stand for. And it doesn't have to be suicide. It can be moments when parents and children completely disagree on a matter or a choice in life or something else. And it's about dialoguing out before and saying, this is who I am. This is how much I love you. And even if you do this, I'm not abandoning you. It doesn't mean I agree with what you're doing, but I'm not abandoning you. All that has to be clearly articulated, has to be clearly explained, because so many can jump to conclusions about things and misinterpret what somebody wanted to do or was in favor of or wasn't in favor of or whatever. And I found that so fruitful to as it were, in my mind's eye, go around and have a chat in prayer with everybody who was at the crucifixion. From the person who was nailing Jesus to the cross, to the women who were mourning, to the Mother of God. Go in prayer and have a conversation with every person and ask them, why are you here? And open yourself to the Holy Spirit to and then take the results of that prayer to your spiritual director, to a friend, to someone that wholesomely understands life and death, and say, this is where I was. What do I do with this? Bring the community into it. Don't divorce yourself from them. And before I miss off on Francis or anybody else, Warren, anybody, you see Father Alan Wazinski there.
Yes.
Is there anybody who has participated in Dying Healed, the program Dying Healed? If somebody has, I'd love, before we finish our call, to have someone to jump in on Dying Healed. It's a wonderful program, strongly supported by the Knights of Columbus. It enlists people to learn some skills and to defeat as much as to mitigate the loneliness that so many people are bothered with. Usually that can often lead to some of these tragic decisions. Dying Healed, wonderful program, if anybody can say more about that.
So thank you so much, Bishop and Francis and Alex, for all your detailed answers and discussion. I would like to ask Father Allen to talk about discontinuing life support. Father Allen is a hospital chaplain, so I'd like for him to comment on this.
I wanted to address this because someone in chat had asked about the discontinuation of life support, and is that a form of euthanasia? And generally speaking, no, it is not. Like traditionally, historically, we've thought of death as when the heart stops beating and you stop breathing, and that's called clinical death. But we realize today that really death is not a dependent on a single factor. It's a series of events. And so setting aside clinical death, we judge life by, has there been biological death? So in my experience, that the most common reason to discontinue life support is because the breathing, the heartbeat is being continued artificially, but there has been a biological death because the brain function has ceased. And this is a very clear indication that this is a permanent death. And because of our modern technology, we can certainly keep a person breathing and the heart going, but once there has been cessation of brain function, then the person is literally biologically dead. And so in that case, it's in no way a form of euthanasia to discontinue life support. And families need to know that when they're asked by hospital for permission to pull a plug and the doctors say that the brain function has ceased, there has been a biological death, and they can in good faith allow that plug to be pulled. And I speak that from my own personal experience because this happened to my grandfather. Long before I was first a hospital pharmacist, and then I'm now a hospital chaplain, but my family went through that, and it was a great relief to us to know that in good faith the plug could be pulled, and that we were not killing him. He was dead. Thank you.
So Father Allen is completely correct. There's a complete moral difference between withdrawing life support and actually lethally injecting somebody, right? And the one, is an acceptance that natural death is occurring, and sometimes when you pull life support, someone doesn't die. Like, you may withdraw life support, they kept on living. But obviously when you lethally inject someone, the drugs that are injected are to kill. The result is death, and it's intentional to kill. It's not about allowing natural death to occur. And no, you don't continue living ever. It's you are killed. That's it. That's the purpose of it. That's how it's done. So there's clearly a difference between withdrawing life support and euthanasia, which is to kill.
Thank you so much, Father Allen, for that explanation, and Alex for the follow-up. And I guess another follow-up question in the comment was, is this corporal killing? No, not manslaughter, correct? Sorry, I can't find the question now. Murder compared to planned murder, premeditated murder. That's what I'm looking for.
Well, according to the criminal code, it's an exception to first-degree murder because it's planned, it's premeditated, it's intended. And when you look at the criminal code, how the only really one thing the government did correctly is they were honest. It's in the Homicide Act, and it's an exception to homicide. It's not second degree. It's not it's not manslaughter. It's an exception to planned murder. Is what it is. And so, yeah, it's murder. And even the government would agree with you, but they say there's an exception because these are the circumstances and these are the rules around it. And so, yeah, it is.
I quickly want to share something here. Can you see this Catholic Health Ethics Guide?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, this is something that each province has Catholic health ministry, and usually that's run by a corporation, if you will, of bishops, and many wise and skilled and talented people assist or are hired by them, etc. Francis is involved in that. And one of the things that they have put out Canada-wide is the Catholic Health Alliance of Canada, that is this Catholic Health Ethics Guide. Can't say enough about it. Really take a look at that. Take a picture of your camera of that cover there. It's very reasonable and available, and it breaks down in simple, common to understand language some of the technical difficulties, the ethical nuances that we might be describing here tonight. Catholic Health Ethics Guide is a wonderful resource on everything from the commodification of a body part. You can't sell kidneys, you can't sell things like this. That's not what God intended. And I dare say that the Catholic Health Ethics Guide is probably one of the best evangelization tools. If you want to understand in practical, living, tangible terms what it means to have a Catholic value, read that book and how it applies to life and death situation, how it applies to assisting people, and when you don't assist them in such a case as this, killing yourself. Francis.
I just want to really highlight what you just said, Bishop Brian. And because we live in the time of technology, you can actually download the little app, Health Ethics Guide, and it was created in collaboration with the Canadian Alliance of Canada, Catholic Health, and Covenant Health. So it's an excellent, it has little video, have lots of examples. If you want to get the actual guide that Bishop Brian was saying, it's $9.99 if you download it to your phone. So it's really good. I just want to say thank you for inviting me today. It's been a really robust conversation. Father Warren, I really enjoy and appreciate your comments about funerals and how most people who come to church, well, we come because we need to be there, not because we're ready to go. And Father Allen, I think absolutely. I mean, when we talk about, unplugging people, I think it's good to talk about, just as you said it, we look at from the Catholic view, what is the benefits and the burdens? And sometimes a treatment may not be initiated if it's not going to provide adequate success to treatment of the well-being of the person. So it is okay to not start something or to discontinue something if it's no longer doing what it's meant to do to help the individual. That is very different, and you put it so well. It's so different than euthanasia. Both are part of how we understand our commitment to life, but also taking in consideration that our bodies are not meant to live forever. And so sometimes, no matter what you do, the treatments no longer are successful. It's just because the body says, I had enough. And so this is where we need the medical people to help us understand, is this more of a burden on the person? Or is it better to let the normal course to take its place? And that is not medical assisted in dying. That's a good way of palliative care. That's a good way of looking after the well-being of those entrusted to us. So thank you for both of those comments. I really appreciate that. And Bishop Brian, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Francis. My last parting word, because I know we're getting close. I'm looking at the hosts of the program. I really think everyone needs to say, what does God want me to do now? How does God want me to be more educated about what I thought I knew and I don't know so well? How do I respond to that? And how does God want to use me in getting across to somebody? How does God want to use me? That was Jesus. How does God the Father want to use my life? How does he want to use my death? And how does he want to take my resurrection? The Father is going to resurrect me. The Father's going to do that. And how does he want to use that? To say to others, he loves them. And I think that's an important dimension of tonight's gathering, is why did I hear what I heard tonight? How does God want to use me? How am I to educate and inform my conscience better than it was before the show? And how does God want to use me? This important consideration, I think.
Thank you so much, Bishop, for those final words. And on behalf of everybody, thank you so much, Alex and Francis and Father Warren and Father Allen, for being here. And I think everybody, I see the chat box is lighting up. Thank you so much. A real eye-opener. things are worse than I imagined. It's a slippery slope. And also, I think something that Francis, you said, we all have to prepare, and you want to do it when you're not in this in the storm at the hospital, you know, and these are hard conversations to have with your loved ones. But I think something that Alex said, you know, having somebody as your power of attorney who shares the same values as you is important. So we don't know what life holds for us, so only God knows. And so having those decisions made ahead of time, and the conversations with your family members too, saying that it's not my wish to, you know, go this way. So thank you everybody so much for joining us today. And it's by the Holy Spirit. I don't know, Father Alan, where you're from. I don't know. I don't know what province you're from. You got a beautiful background. He's Winnipeg? No, lovely. Well, thank you, Father Alan, for joining us tonight. And once again, Father Warren, and I know Deacon Paul is on the call, and Francis and Alex and Bishop Brian as always. So in a few minutes, we'll wrap up. So on behalf of everybody on the call, we wish everybody who is entering into Holy Week next week, a blessed Holy Week, a reflective Holy Week, and a blessed Pascha coming up. And now I'll hand it over to Sean, who will put up some slides in a second.
Hi, everyone. So I just want to share just some info going out. We talked about, you know, some heavy stuff tonight, and we've been having these conversations. I mean, Alex has been giving us the legal side of what's happening in Canada, but we've been talking about these issues of losing hope on our program for a few months now. I think when we had Father Trovsky on, he gave a great talk on the resurrection, and that is truly our hope. So if you haven't heard that talk, then please tune into it. Another great talk I'll reference you to here on our YouTube channel, Tranquil Light Calling, was with Deacon Paul when we discussed suicide, mental health in the church. And following up to that talk, we had Father Brian Kolodejczyk on, who was the postulator for Mother Teresa. So those are two great talks as well. If you're struggling with those issues, this community is really open and willing to have these kinds of conversations. I just threw together a couple of slides, this one on the health ethics app. And I have the book. It's a great little book. You can order the hard copy or get the app if you want, wherever you get your other apps from. The compassionate care community that Alex mentioned, I did not know about this resource. So thank you so much, Alex, for bringing it to our attention. Here's the helpline. You can email them, and their website is there below as well. And Alex, you mentioned, can you just mention again about there's some kind of training coming up for that?
Yeah, the next training is on the 29th. It's actually, funny enough, being done for the Diocese of Salt Lake City. And because it's being done for the Diocese of Salt Lake City, that's how it started. But I mean, that's why the time is different also. But it's going to be 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. If you email Compassionate Community Care or email me, which would be info@epcc.ca, info@epcc.ca. You can register, or you can just Google Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. We come up nice and easy, but info@epcc.ca, and you can become part of that training session. This is actually going to be an overview session. It's only going to be an hour. So.
Okay, thanks for that. I also wanted to mention your organization, the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, and there is the web address below. Again, Alex has an extensive blog that you can plug into there if you want to read more of his articles. And oh wait, I have one more slide. Let's see if I can't get back to it right now. And Dying Healed, the program that Bishop mentioned. So that looks like another great program, and the website I put there as well. So finally, I think we have an announcement to make. I'll say Christ is risen again, Christos voskres. And for those on the old calendar and on Julian, in a couple of weeks, you'll be celebrating the risen Christ. Larissa and I and Bishop want to let everybody know that for a variety of reasons, we are going to be pausing with the conversation.
We're not pulling the plug.
We're not pulling the plug, but we're pausing. We're not pulling the plug. We're not looking for made for the program or anything like that. But we're going to pause for a variety of reasons. Next week is Holy Week for the Julian calendar, and it's just a number of our schedules have become really, really busy. So we're going to take a pause on these programs, but we will be uploading some of the previous shows we did last fall that were only on Facebook. We will be uploading them to our YouTube channel, and we have a lot of great programs there. And then hopefully we'll be back in the fall with a whole new set of shows. And I know that last week we had Deacon Cyril on, who was talking about the Old Testament, and he promised us to come back. So we have to keep our promises, and we will see you guys all back in the fall. I want to thank Alex again for coming on tonight and doing just a phenomenal presentation for us. There was so much. I'm sure I'm going to be going over the YouTube and just watching it again, just with all the info that you had in there. And maybe I'll just ask Bishop Brian to close with a prayer for us tonight.
In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, your mysteries are so high above ours, and we are so fragile. We are creatures that, despite our good intentions, despite our yearnings, we may be just afraid, and we use conscious exaggeration in what we say so often. I've got tons of homework. I'm so tired I could die. Some of that really comes to bear on when we're very, very afraid. And people think that that's the only way out is to kill themselves. That's the only way out. That's the only way they see. Send us to be there, to have that conversation with those people. Prepare us and send us to be with them so that you can use us, so that you can use our words and sow love and sow hope with the words that we might speak to them. So that they can think clearly and they can express truly what's on their heart, articulate what's on their heart, despite so many different feelings that fill their heart. We ask that you bless all of those who participate in these events online. Pray for those who are challenged with situations in the next days ahead, or sorting through events that took place not long ago. And we ask for your mercy. Amen.
Once again, thank you everybody for joining us. And we would like to thank Bishop Brian for being available a year. We came just asking for a one-time guest appearance on our Zoom call, Theology Thursday, which Subdeacon Sean used to do. And it was a one-time, and then that beautifully blossomed into this wonderful fellowship that we've been having weekly for a year. And so we thank you everybody for your dedication, for believing in Subdeacon Sean's and mine and Bishop's and Father Warren, we got you in, and Father Tom and Father Michael. So we thank everybody so much for coming together every Thursday night, and feel free to go back on Tranquil Light Calling and watch previous videos. And as Subdeacon Sean said, we're going to upload stuff that was on Facebook and transfer it over. So we wish you well. Stay healthy, stay safe. and stay connected. You know, we're a national church, and we have, I have almost, I think, all eparchies. Father Allen said he's from the Archeparchy of Winnipeg, but his heart is in BC. So we have all the eparchies represented. So please stay connected with your eparchy, with your church, and also with us. So thank you, everybody. God bless, and Christos Voskres, and we will see you in the fall.